we have until 11:55, so I want to get this conversation going. Questions are going to come up, everybody. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. I'll get them to them at the end of the conversation. But Dr. Z has a lot going on, and when you have to leave at like 11:55, she'll have time for questions. As you can tell, she's very busy, and it's really awesome that she's here to join us. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Brian Chaplin, the founder of Medicine Box. I've been in the plant medicine world for 15 plus years. I've grown cannabis and hemp and psilocybin mushrooms. I'm also in recovery from drugs and alcohol. I celebrated 10 years, September 9th. And I always say I'm sober, not somber. I'm not Cali sober because I don't like identifying with terminology. I'm just a human being. And I have used psychedelics extensively in my own recovery process. So this conversation that we're about to have is near and dear to my heart, and I'm very passionate about these topics. And it's going to be really fun hearing from Dr. Z, who is a licensed family doctor specializing in natural medicine and integrative mental health. In addition to seeing patients in private practice, she works internationally as a psychedelic medicine provider, speaker, and advocate. Her diverse experiences with psychedelic healing include journeys to Peru's Sacred Valley, training in MDMA-assisted therapy through MAPS, Boom Boom, volunteering with groups like the Zendo Project, who's part of MAPS at Burning Man, and Whitebird at Oregon Country Fair, assisting at ibogaine treatment centers in Mexico, working at a psilocybin center in Jamaica, and being one of the first doctors in America to present on psychedelics in a medical grand rounds. So worldly psychedelic person here. Dr. Z is committed to educating healthcare providers and policymakers on the therapeutic value of psychedelics, understanding that addiction is an illness. Addiction is an illness. Over 100,000 people died in 2021 from drug overdoses, and the 100,000 more, millions more that we don't know of that suffers in isolation. She's also an advocate for supporting those with substance use disorder rather than criminalizing them. People that are addicted to drugs and alcohol are humans too. Let's remember that. She is also the author of a medical literature review on the power of vitamin C to prevent and treat opioid dependency. We're going to talk about that today. And moreover, as one of the lead educators of the Psychedelic Facilitator Training Program, Inner Trek, whose founder, Tom Eckert, helped legalize psilocybin-assisted therapy in Oregon. Dr. Z is putting many of these lessons learned on the ground to shape the practices of the first state-accredited psilocybin facilitators in North America, who you were teaching this weekend, right? Did I pick up on that? All right. You did. So that is Dr. Z in just a tiny little nutshell. It's 11:11. Let's take a deep breath, and then we're going to get into questions, and I'm going to give the talking stick to Dr. Z. So thanks for being here. We're going to get right to it, and thank you all for joining. It's really appreciative of people taking time out of their day. It's the most valuable asset, and you get to spend that with us. So on your website, you mentioned that after college or uni, you wanted to go into medicine, but you didn't want to go to the mainstream route. Mm-hmm. Why was that? Right.
I didn't feel that spark. There is definitely power in conventional medicine, and I use it as well in my practice, but it was missing. I couldn't quite put my finger on it then. I can now. It was missing soul. It was missing spirit. It was missing any kind of room for, even in the integrative medical world, we have mind, body, health. Okay, there's something hugely missing in that. And it's the soul, it's the spirit, right? There really is no mind or body without the soul. And I also know knew then, as I know now, that while conventional medicine is very good at heroics, you get your finger cut off, you don't need a homeopath. You need to go straight to the ER and get that sewn back on, right? What conventional medicine is not very good at treating is chronic illness. And as it turns out, the majority of illnesses that people in this part of the world are suffering from and dying from are actually from chronic illness. And a lot of those illnesses are created by and can be prevented by lifestyle choices, nutritional choices, and natural medicines. And so I saw there was this great big gaping hole in the medical system. And I didn't really feel called to be part of the healing in that way.
So treating humans as people and not as these blobs of illness, right? On the
Yes.
other side of and taking them into the fourth dimension.
Right. Well, and one of the principles of conventional medicine is you identify the disease and then you remove the disease. And the medical philosophy that I come from, that's part of it, but the medical philosophy is actually quite different. It's you identify the human and you treat the whole person and you turn up the dial on their vitality. And then their vitality takes care of the disease. And when it doesn't, which it sometimes doesn't, right, then we can intervene with our heroic tools and sort of assist that process. But by putting the person at the center in less of a victimized role, I find that I'm able to help people heal in a way that some of my conventional medical colleagues just aren't.
And you're staying open-minded to that too, all the way from the very beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without going into the traditional Western medical route and challenging those belief systems and still navigating your way through becoming a medical professional. Where there's a lot of folks that have like gone through that and then they're like, well, I'm super jaded and I was taught all the wrong things, and backtracking, right? Reverse engineering their knowledge. So what did you say? Turn up the vitality. I want to say that. Say that one more time.
Yeah, just
turn up the vitality.
Turn up the dial on the vitality. Yeah. So every one of us has a vital force. Now, you can call it whatever you want to call it. You can call it inner healer, inner wisdom. In Chinese medicine, they call it qi, or prana in India, or ki in Japan, reiki. Ki is talking about that same vital force. Every person, every living thing has that vital force. When you look at a plant as it grows, it pushes forward, right? There's that greening energy. In Latin, it's called the viritudas. It's that greening power. And we have that greening power too. We have that vital force as well. And so what I see my role as being as a healthcare provider is to help a person identify anything that might be blocking their vital force, remove that obstacle, and then align with things ideally in nature, but sometimes chemical if we need to, that are going to synergize with that vital force or crank up the volume on the vital force. Because what differentiates us from, say, cars, we have mechanics too. We have parts and pieces that have functions. But what's different with us is we have a vital force, which is why we have all these medical anomalies of people recovering when they weren't supposed to, right? Or people who should be responding to treatment but aren't, and their vitality is cranked way down. So I kind of joke, like the Star Wars reference of like, use the force. Like when I don't know what to do with a patient, I just kind of think like, okay, use the force. How, what's in the way of the force? What's blocking it? Or what could be helping it express itself more effectively here?
I like how you analogize that with nature too, which could be a whole other divergent conversation. Dr. Ethan Russo, one of our colleagues, he studies terpenes and cannabis terpenes, and probably like one of the most knowledgeable around terpenes. He calls the terpenes the quintessential fifth element life force of the plant world. That's his phrase there. So at Medicine Box, one thing we always say is everybody's in recovery from something. New York City, LA, relationships, drugs, alcohol, whatever it might be. But tell us about how you treat addiction and what needs to change in order to get this right. It's very misunderstood. So
Oh, hugely misunderstood. Well, I see addiction as I do virtually any disease that arises from within the organism, which is it's an adaptation. And there's something in medicine called maladaptive physiology, meaning the organism has something challenging to work with that is a huge threat to the organism. And the organism needs to respond, it needs to adapt in a way that it can continue to function despite this major challenge being there. And reaching for a substance of abuse is a very reasonable way of responding to a very challenging situation, depending on what the situation may be, and depending on what tools are available. Self-medicating with alcohol, with cannabis, with opiates, it may actually be an adaptation of that organism just trying to survive, just trying to take care of itself in a way that it can in that moment. And so what disease, and this is where the philosophy of disease is a little different. If we think of disease not as a thing that we need to destroy, but rather as an attempt at a very intelligent organism to stay alive and heal, then our understanding of addiction becomes rather different. Now, at a certain point,
humanizes it.
Yeah.
I like how you humanized it all. I appreciate that from a former, and still with addictive tendencies every day.
Right.
Right. But humanizing it really brings it into a place of greater understanding and more like humble beginnings and a humble way to look at it.
Yeah. And I will say I see this often. I live in Portland, Oregon, which has a very big homeless population. It's approaching a bit of a crisis point here. And I've been in situations where we're passing encampments of homeless people, and whoever I'm with has said disparaging things like, yeah, half of them are junkies or something like that. And I've said, you know what? If I had to live in this encampment and this was my life, and I had to face somebody psychologically abusing me, physically abusing me, I was always afraid that someone was going to steal my stuff or violate my body, or that the police were going to come and chase me. I'd be using too.
Yeah.
Do you really think you could withstand that life without some kind of putting some kind of cushion on your nervous system? I couldn't. And you're hungry and you can't have a meal on a regular basis. That's maybe using fentanyl is actually a very intelligent response to a very harsh and inhumane situation. Now, I know that's an extreme situation, but when we look at substance use disorders from that lens, to me, it becomes clear that there are at least two major branches we need to focus on in the treatment of substance use disorders. One is we need to interrupt the chemistry of addiction. And there is a chemical element of addiction, right? You use a substance time and time again, it changes your chemistry, right? We know, for example, opiates deplete your endocannabinoid system. So then you're going to feel pain more acutely. And then you're going to want more of your opiates because you are physically in pain. Your body thinks it's dying, right? So we need to interrupt the chemistry happening there. Absolutely. And that's where conventional medicine hyper-focuses and does a pretty good job. And I think that's where it stops. But then there's this whole other piece of we need to examine why this human had to adapt in such a way that they needed the substance of abuse in the first place. Was there a trauma here? Is there unstable housing? Is there ancestral trauma? doesn't even have to be yours.
Yeah.
Is this person an empath, and do they just feel the pain of the world? You know, what was actually the root cause? Isolation, you know, poverty, whatever. What was actually the root cause that led this person to maladapt in this way? And I think for an addiction treatment to be successful, you've got to do both. You've got to do both. To some degree, I think psychedelics can do both. But if we really want to treat addiction, we also, as a society, have to look at how we perpetuate it as a culture.
That's it.
Yeah.
Taking a full holistic viewpoint from the top down in, bottom up from the root.
Yeah.
And I like what you really mentioned about homeless population in Portland. It's I always say that, you know, addicts are people too, and homeless people are people too, but we have such a misunderstanding, and they're a lot of times they're synonymous, right? And a lot of people just look at like, oh, they're junkies or they're mentally ill, and just brush them off. But the point that you made about, you know, I would want to escape from that reality too.
Yeah.
Right. It made me think of what Gabor Mate says. His simple definition of addiction is just to escape from the present moment.
Sure.
How many times do you know, just for the audience listening, you don't have to be addicted to drugs and alcohol, but how many times in our day do we want to escape the present moment? Whether that's through our phone, social media, food, people, anything, you know. So it's a good tip to practice more mindfulness and awareness around where you're reaching for this external thing to escape your own present reality. So you started to talk about the role of psychedelics in addiction therapy, and how can it help disrupt the dangerous habits drug and alcohol dependent people possess?
Yeah. Well, if there is a mental emotional component to the root cause of the addiction, which I would argue there almost always is, a psychedelic experience, if properly integrated, can help a person get to that root. For example, trauma experience that hasn't been properly integrated into the body or contextualized. Or even sometimes I have patients say to me, you know, I'm so ashamed that I have these problems because I never experienced a trauma. You know, I grew up in a loving home, in a middle-class family, and was on, you know, the soccer team as a kid. And okay, but we all experience little t traumas, right? That, you know, your best friend broke up with you when you were 14, or you never quite felt like you were smart enough for your dad, and like he was always disappointed in you, or that big heartbreak, the one that got away, whatever it is, or growing up in a very religious family and then leaving the faith. We all have these little t traumas, and they kick around in our psyches, they kick around in our bodies, right? And they get carried away. And so sometimes the root cause of an addiction can just be a story that, like, I'm not cool and people don't like me if I'm not high.
That was
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Or I have social anxiety. It's really hard for me to talk to people. And if I take a Xanax before I go to the party, I have a better time and people like me more, right? And then you do that too many times, and then you've got a problem. So what psychedelics can do is, and I want to be very clear that when people are using a psychedelic in a therapeutic context, they're not getting high. They are zeroing in on a very, very deep emotional and psychological process that needs to be reconciled and that needs to be focused on and healed. And so psychedelics can help people do that. They can help you forgive that parent that's already died that you won't ever get to talk to again, or forgive yourself for that thing that you did when you were 15, or understand that these definitions that other people have put on you are not who you actually are. Whatever that process is, psychedelic work can be like a four-wheel drive to what regular talk therapy might be able to accomplish in that way. And then, depending on the psychedelic, it can also change your neurochemistry. So the most robust example we have of this is ibogaine, which we know binds to opiate receptors, and we know binds to a number of other receptors in the brain to interrupt the actual physiological aspects of the addiction. Because addiction, remember, has those two parts. It's that mental emotional piece, but then also your body and your chemistry gets hooked as well. So you're fighting a war on two fronts. And so what I've seen happen as people go through treatment with ibogaine is we're able to interrupt the chemistry of the addiction. And then that person is able to do a deeper psychospiritual deep dive into the root cause as well. And you just can't do that with methadone. You just can't. It's not what that drug does.
The warm fuzzy blanket of methadone.
Mm-hmm. Which I want to say is the right choice for some patients, right? For some people.
And the only access for some patients.